record. Hey everyone, welcome to our two-part workshop that we are able to finally record and offer to you. We've actually shifted this a little bit thanks to the help of Jen Ferris, and this is now officially going to be a ethics CEU for you. So throughout the process of what we'll be presenting to you will be aligned with a code or a point from the code in our ethics code to make sure that what we're doing is truly ethical in alignment with what we should be doing as behavior analysts, as well as just best current practices. Perfect. So I am Meg or Margaret Thomas Solomon, and I currently have ABA across environments in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's fall right now. It's absolutely beautiful. So I am enjoying every moment of this right now, of this early October. I hope that where you are, you've gotten at least a cool front and you're also experiencing something. But I'm looking at my dear friend, Dr. Mari Serra, and I don't know if that cool front has hit where you are just yet. Has it?
I mean, if you consider highs of like 85 and 90 a cool front, yes.
You're a
Um,
good 5 to 10 degrees cooler.
yeah. So it's been nice. Although we did have a really mild summer, which was kind of scary. I don't think we had more than a handful of days at 100 or, close to. So, and we had a lot
And
more
lots of
rain.
rain.
Yes. So the farmers here are a little nervous as to what winter is going to bring because we did have that snow apocalypse
Yep.
a few years ago where it got down to like -7, -8, which here is unreal. We can handle 112-degree weather, but the negative degree temps were doozies. So we're enjoying it right now. It's very cool in the morning, typical desert climate, very cool in the morning and evenings,
Yeah.
and then pretty warm in the middle of the day. So yeah. And I guess I'll carry it from there. I'm Mari Cerda, and I am always so excited to see these beautiful women's faces and get to connect with them, other than our group text where we're panicking or ranting about something business related. I own a Lighthouse Learning Center in Texas, Lubbock, Texas, the lovely conservative Bible Belt area. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
My turn, huh? So yes, always a pleasure to be here with both of you. My name is Jen Ferris. I am the owner and chief science officer of Sprout ABA Services. We are a boutique ABA agency in Western Massachusetts. We also provide services in Vermont and New Hampshire because we're up in this cool little nook. It's absolutely falling here. I had to bust out my light down coat yesterday, and today I could do with just a down vest. But it is now beautiful outside. The leaves are starting to change. The air is a little bit crisp. It's quite lovely. So, um, excited to be here with all of you. I'll take us into our first slide on ethics. And so we did build this out to include ethics codes for you. And so our obligatory slide that is this talk is for ethics. And here's some of the ones that we're going to mention. And so 3.01, the responsibility to our clients. I like the word learners. That we're always acting in their best interest. 2.15, minimizing risk of behavior change interventions. And then, of course, we have some real core principles around it's a benefit to others. We treat others with compassion, dignity, and respect, and behavior with integrity, behave with integrity, and ensure our own competence. So we're here to help teach you about the implementation of REFRAME. And as we go through each section, we will also have the ethics code that aligns with that section as well. Do you want me to keep going? Okay, this is always where I hand it back over to Meg, who is the one who really started the reframe journey.
So, yeah, this was really something that we started talking about. I've with running the Instagram page of Across Environments, which I haven't really been doing much in the past few months because of taking a step away from things that aren't necessarily bringing me joy anymore. No offense to social media. But when I was writing so often, these current themes and they just kept coming up. And I thought, well, if these are still problems that we're seeing 10 years after I've been in the field, that's a problem. And how can I teach people or write about it in a way that's meaningful to me? And so Maddie and I've known each other for many years now at this point. And when I was writing and getting through some stuff, we really started talking about this idea of you still have to be culturally responsive in everything that we do. That's also part of our code of ethics. So when we're truly culturally responsive, that means that we're taking a radical approach to our own behavior. And being a white woman and cisgender with a nuclear family, I couldn't necessarily identify in a way that would be truly meaningful and helpful in a way. So that's when Madi and I really started talking about what this would look like. And then Madi was like, man, and if we're going to talk about this, then we really are going to have to talk about this, which was the the fact that within our ABA coursework, we never actually go through childhood development. Well, very rarely, I should say. Somehow in my coursework, I did get childhood development, which was phenomenal and super helpful because you recognize that there are many things that we push within our field that are simply just not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate. And so Monty was amazing with adding in that chapter as well. And when she and I are talking about, well, if we really want some good credibility, we really have to include data. And that's where the beautiful Jen Ferris comes in. And that is adding in the data to a way that only a precision teacher could, which is really letting you know that if you ain't doing great, you're not doing great. So I couldn't agree more. And this is something that I think that all of us also try to teach our supervisees as well as our RBTs who work within our agencies. And many of us also teach as part-time faculty with certain universities to help develop that graduate coursework as well. And that's one of the other things that we really emphasize, which is when you're taking data, percent really is crap. So let's look at what it looks like across time, because it's really how we do all things with behavior analysis is over time measured. So the best way to do that is, of course, in succinct time frames with that frequency, which, as we all know, is rate. And then what do we look at whenever we're looking at graphs and which graphs actually matter? And I think we can all agree that the standard acceleration chart is superior to a chart that can, there a graph that can be manipulated in an Excel spreadsheet. Just saying. Any graph can be pretty if you manipulate it enough. And I think that that's also highlighted in our book, thanks to Jen in a more eloquent way. But yes, that's our story. That's the story of Reframe and how it all got started. But do y'all have anything you wanted to add to our inception? All right. Okay. I'll also go through this slide a little bit because sometimes it can be daunting whenever you're looking at this. Reframe is a textbook for all intents and purposes, but it's also designed to help us as implementers change our own behavior as part of the environment where we're teaching. We start with very radical self-assessments. And these self-assessments are designed to help address some of your personal bias. And Jen's going to very eloquently go into that in greater detail later. But it's also to help us recognize that your unique learning history is different than every single student's learning history, and their learning histories are also different. So, because of that, we also try to provide case studies. These case studies are across a multitude of different students and learners. To be perfectly honest, several of the case studies who are examples are from people I actually have known throughout my life. And I wanted to honor their lives. And this was my way of doing so, to tell their stories in a way that could also be helpful and therapeutic for other people as well. But the case studies are also designed to help us learn and to present these problems that come up in our everyday apply or application of behavior analytic practices, right? So then what we do is we talk about, well, what do you do with all of this information? And the reality is that we have to use some sort of flexible approach to this because every context is different. Our learning histories context and our current context are radically different than each other from each other. So this is where the idea of acceptance and commitment therapy comes into play. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is something that we can use as a practice every moment, every time a challenge arises, and even when we're in that HRE or RRE, as Maudie's going to talk about later, so that what we're doing is constantly evolving for the betterment of our learners, as opposed to digging our heels into this is the only way because it's evidence-based. Everything that we're talking about is evidence-based. We're just asking that you look at this in a different way. And with that, also reflect upon what you're currently doing. What are some areas of adjustment? Where can you improve your own performance and practice these beautiful self-management skills that we tell everybody else to follow, and yet we typically struggle to apply for ourselves? So that's our hope within the practice of Reframe. There are discussion questions at the end of each chapter. They're also designed to help create discussions so that you're not doing this alone. We also highly recommend that while you're doing the self-assessments, you recognize that some of these questions are going to be dirty, and you might need to actually ask for help from somebody who has clinical therapeutic practices within their scope. In other words, don't go to a BCBA for this help. Cool. Bonnie, why don't you describe Reframe? I feel like the way that you've always defined it is my favorite.
Oh gosh, let's see if I can remember the way that that was the way I've done that in the past. It's been a minute. But Reframe really has been a labor of love for all of us. And one of the primary foundational components of it is the act of getting to know yourself, whether it's getting to know who you are now, after going through coursework, after becoming a BCBA, or after getting your RBT certification, really kind of having that time and spending that energy on getting to know who you are. The very first chapter of Reframe is a deep dive into self-reflection, and that part can take a little bit, and it's not kind of a one and done. It's something where you really have to look in the mirror and really bring some things to the surface to recognize where you may have some biases or wounds or just learning histories in your backpack that you don't, that emotional backpack that we all kind of carry in and carry everywhere with us, that we may not even be aware that we're pulling things out of this backpack as we go about our workday, whether it's through engagement with colleagues or staff, from an organizational perspective, or whether it's in how we are engaging with the learner. or even the parents and the caregivers. And so, Reframe was decided, it took us a while to decide on the name of this book. And we came up with all of these kind of core values that through the years, as we've, individually gone through our careers and practices, these core values just came to mind, and we were able to kind of organize them in a way that we came up with Reframe. So the R in Reframe stands for responsive. And that is a piece that I think we probably all had that as one of the core values. But for me personally, it comes from an acronym from a framework that I'm hopefully almost done with the manuscript to actually submit an article for. But RRE is HRE, and it is regulated, responsive, and empowered. And the responsive piece is so critical because when we aren't aware and self-reflective and knowing what we're pulling from our, backpack of history, we can very quickly and easily shift into a reactive, person. And that those reactive behaviors can really set the tone from, and the culture and the sense of safety in a session with a learner, in a session with caregivers, in our interactions and meetings with colleagues or staff. And so responsive was the very first, piece to reframe of like, how do we teach our colleagues to engage in self-reflective practices to make sure, am I coming from a place of responsiveness or reactiveness and even self-defensive behaviors. The next value was engaging. Sometimes I really see, especially in like supervision or supervisory relationships, I see this lack of engagement. I hear my student analysts say, "Oh, I really want to do this. I want to become a BCBA. I want to, do what you're doing." But when they're out there and they're doing the work, I don't see that same level of passion for wanting to get their credentials. And so what's going on in ourselves, right? Through self-reflection, how can we identify why am I having issues with engagement, or what's going on that I don't have that level of engagement, whether it's with the learner, whether it's with colleagues, whether it's with caregivers. And the next letter in Reframe is F, which is for flexible. And this one I vaguely remember us having as co-authors a few chuckles about, because so often, we're teaching skills that are about psychological and emotional flexibility for our learners. And yet so many times we see our staff and BCBAs and student analysts engaging in some very rigid behaviors. And it's like, well, it's kind of hard to expect a lot of flexibility from one, side of this therapeutic relationship, but not from the other. So engaging in some of this self-reflection to understand, why am I being inflexible? What is it in my backpack? What is it maybe from my learning through coursework that has made me a little more rigid? And I think sometimes an unfortunate side effect of the way that BCBAs are trained is and even RBTs, is there's this kind of like stripping away of critical thinking skills, and a very much a just follow the behavior plan, just follow the steps, follow the protocols, just do, and I don't need you to think about it. And so we strip away this autonomy and agency of our RBTs and our BCBAs, and all of a sudden, if you don't have the capacity or you don't have the ability and permission to think critically and to make adjustments in the moment for a session, if you don't have that trust and that kind of confidence from your leadership to say, hey, try something, if this is not working, like that's why we call it a probe, try and see what, because then we can shift and make changes and adjustments and modifications. But when we don't provide that kind of ethos and space for our team, we are going to get rigidity. We're going to get that lack of flexibility. And so part of this self-awareness chapter and self-reflection chapter is really digging into like, what are these variables in my own life that are preventing me from being able to be flexible? And then do I recognize that if I'm not able to model flexibility, it's really impossible for me to expect this of my learner, of my staff, of my caregivers. And so self-reflection is a big piece of like, hey, if you're asking all of these things of your staff, learners, caregivers, and you don't model them, we've got a major problem and we're not going to really be able to move forward. The next letter in Reframe is R, which is for radical. And as we were writing this book, I think we all kind of felt like, man, we're way out there. Like people are going to be, you know, we know we're going to get some heat. We know, people are really going to push back because we're touching on areas that people don't want to self-reflect on. People don't want to recognize that the very first and most impactful stimuli or variable in the environment is our presence and what we bring. And so, it may sound kind of hooey, crunchy, hippie, whatever, to like, oh, what am I bringing, but being radical, Skinner talked about that and talks about like, hey, emotions, thoughts, these are behaviors. We don't have great ways to measure them, but you're bringing these things, and they become, you know, either aversive or reinforcing components of the environment. And so, to think radically in that capacity is something that we're asking our readers to kind of stretch, allow yourself to stretch and take that risk of like, okay, what if I do think outside of the box? What's going to happen? And I promise you, the sky isn't going to fall, and you know, the whole thing's not going to fall apart. But having that sense of autonomy and agency and freedom to do that can be very scary. So it's really important that, we have that courage and we encourage our team and colleagues, parents and learners to also have that courage. The next is, let's see, assent-based, the A in Reframe. And, assent-based, I think we've all seen it kind of come a long way. And so we do touch quite a bit on assent-based practices and talking about, learner agency and autonomy and their ability to have a say in participating in these interventions and supports and programs. And, we also are very aware that, and this will probably be something that we add in the second edition, of the cultural nuance of assent-based practices and how it's not a blanket approach. And the reason that it's important for us to recognize that, assent is very still an individualized part of the process, and practitioners really need to have a good understanding and awareness of where certain marginalized families come in contact with, punishing, consequences or barriers to be able to non-comply or not assent. Whereas some more privileged clients, based on their demographics, do have that privilege to be able to say, I don't want to participate. I don't assent to this or consent to this. So assent-based, even though, that is a huge component of Reframe, we also are very aware of the nuance of this part of our practice. And then the M in Reframe is meaningful. And by meaningful, we're focused on, is it meaningful to the learner and their family? Is the work that we're doing, because we are essentially intruding into people's lives. And, when we make that intrusion, it's really critical that that time that we're taking from them and their lives, what we're doing is meaningful to them. And the secondary outcome of that is that it becomes meaningful to us. It's not flipped the other way where like, okay, are these goals meaningful to me? Meaning it's going to make my life more convenient, as the therapist, or the RBT or the BCBA, or, it's just going to make, everyone else's lives more meaningful at the detriment or to the detriment of the learner and the family. So when we talk about meaningful, it's having that self-reflective skill set of like, okay, is what I is what are the goals and skills that I'm selecting, is the path that I'm selecting for this learner and their family something that is really centering me and what's meaningful to me, or is it centering their lives and their quality of life and their lived experience and their ability to be successful in their community and their environments. And so that's why we pulled meaningful into the name Reframe. And then the last is education. And education, gosh, the ability to recognize when we don't know it all and having that humility piece of, like, okay, I don't know everything and I'm willing to learn. And also recognizing that if we as adults can say that, hey, I still have the capacity to learn new things, we also have to then apply that to the learner and avoid kind of this trap that we can set for parents, or kind of these coercive uh, things that we can set in place for parents and learners, where it's like, if you don't get them into 40 hours before they're 5 years old, that ability to learn and be educated, with adaptive behavior skills, communication skills, social engagement skills, if we don't do it before this certain age, like this is just some arbitrary cutoff date and it's never going to happen for them, which is really kind of hypocritical when we're in the previous breath saying like, oh, I can still learn stuff as a seasoned behavior analyst, but my 5-year-old client over here, if we don't get them into this this many hours of ABA guided therapy, like, it's hopeless, they're never going to learn. So we're either all capable of lifelong learning and having a growth mindset, or none of us are. It's not just a pick and choose. And so, Reframe really was built on the values of each of these words. And so it made it very easy for us to then guide, the book and the direction of it and the content of it and the values embedded within it. And so just in case, people need that nice hook to our BACB code to, verify that what we're saying is true and accurate. It's right there in code 1.07 about being responsive. Cultural responsiveness and diversity means that we are engaging in continued professional development activities to grow our knowledge and skills related to cultural responsiveness and diversity. And I would say that even more importantly is that we're not only responsive, but we are creating an environment that is culturally safe, meaning that anything that I do in response is to solidify and protect every single learner and their families' cultural identities, any other demographic that they are a part of, that we protect that, and that, through therapy and interventions, we're not inadvertently or intentionally stripping away these things to where they end up looking, we end up looking at them and thinking we're seeing a reflection of ourselves in the mirror. So it's really important that we recognize that it's right there. It's right there in our code of ethics. And it also tells us that we have to evaluate biases. And while it does say to do this evaluation of our supervisees and trainees, we have to do it with ourselves, because you really can't engage in that behavior to somebody else if we haven't done it first within ourselves. And this specific code, this is like an everyday, probably multiple times of the day set of behaviors that we should be engaging in and always checking, right? Setting up these checks and balances of self-reflection of, okay, is what I'm doing being responsive and safe and protecting the diversity and the unique demographics and culture of this family, or am I stripping that away? Am I whitewashing it essentially? Because it's what's convenient and meaningful to me. So there it is, right there in black and white.
Maybe this is a good spot to hop in and talk about some biases and do a little exercise in bias. So I stand here as a privileged white cisgender woman. Um, I hold a master's degree and am working towards my doctorate. So have had the privilege of education and all of that within my life. And so I don't ever not carry that with me. Um, and I think it's an important thing to think about. You know, Madi talked about the emotional backpack, right? And that's not the only thing we carry with us, right? We carry our emotional backpack and we also carry our the intersections of all of our privilege, right? Where we come from, how we got here. You know, I am from parents who were married and a familial unit that was together, two working parents, educated families. And that's something that I don't not carry with me in my life, right? And is something that in terms of being culturally responsive is essential that I sit with and think about how that shows up in the ways that I interact with people, um, whether they're people I know or people I don't know, whether it's with learners, with families, with my own team members. When I stand as the leader and owner of an organization and I'm talking to my entry level technicians, there is a privilege that comes with those things and privileges that I have and I am afforded, that they might not be, and they don't necessarily come to the into the arena, right, if you will, with those same things. And so bias is something that exists. Everybody has it. You don't get to say, I don't have any bias. If somebody says that, they're like, I'm not biased. I'm like, yeah, you are. You have some self-reflection to do because if you don't think you're biased, you definitely are. And it actually means that you're unaware of the biases that you're carrying. And that's a necessary part of being culturally responsive, right? It's not just about saying like, okay, I'm going to use my wonderful frolic Madi here, right? Madi is an indigenous woman. That's not me saying, okay, this is how Madi does things in her house and not how I do them in my house. Okay, sure. That's one level of like your basic recognition that like Madi's lived experience and my lived experience isn't the same, right? Okay, good. You got your first check mark, right? And so it's a lot more than that. It's about every time we are together, virtually, in person, in print, in email, right? There is a privilege that I hold that is different than Madi holds, right? And um, it's about knowing that that exists and how my behavior, I am in charge of that, right? I am in charge of how I show up in those spaces with people, right? Both for Madi and anybody else, right? And it's also recognizing that that's not the same for everybody. So we know each other well, right? We can have dialogue about this, and I can ask questions about my behavior and all of those things, and say, "Is this what you need right now? I got you. No, no, I don't need you to do that." Right? Cool. But how is that for people that you don't know? Do you have that level of rapport with the parent that you're working with? Probably not, because quite frankly, like some of that would people would say breaks a professional boundary, right? Because that level of like comfortability in a relationship is not something that we always have in our professional experiences, right? And so it's about taking those skills and practicing them and being mindful in every single situation that you're in, that you're holding all of that privilege that you come in with all day, all the time, no matter what, right? And that's true even with if you are with people that are the same as you, whether that is that they are the same skin color as you, right? Meg and I are both white women. We hold different privileges. We grew up in different places. There's privileges that Meg holds that I don't, and there might be privileges that I hold that Meg doesn't, right? We're not all the same. And so I think it's about being really cognizant of that in all of your interactions. So I'm going to take you through a little exercise here. And I would ask you to please close your eyes. If you're not comfortable closing your eyes, just soften your gaze and look down so that you're not looking at something in particular. If it's easier for you, we're not live here, but when we are, I say you can go ahead and turn your camera off because that feels uncomfortable to some people to just sit with their eyes closed. And I want you to think about something. This is a hear, see exercise. So I'm going to say a word, and I want you to visualize the first thing that comes to mind for you. We don't have to publicly share them. You're watching a recording. You don't have to email us and tell us all the things that you see or didn't see. But the goal is at the end, you're going to reflect because you are going to notice some things that show up for you. So go ahead, close your eyes, soften your gaze. I want you to envision the first thing that comes to mind when I talk about or what you see as a person, right? When I say something like principal, doctor, custodian, athlete, CEO, professor, learner, behavior analyst. I think you get the point. And so this is where I would ask you to take a couple of minutes and just pause and reflect. How many of those people looked just like you? How many of them had a different color skin? How many of them were in a different socioeconomic bracket than you might be in? And are those the doctors? Or are those other titles that you might associate with that? What did the CEO look like? I've done this in a room full of women CEOs. You were in a room with 3 women entrepreneurs. And the last time I did it, one of them, not these guys, somebody else said it was a white man. And I'm like, y'all are sitting with 3 women business owners, and nobody said it was a woman, regardless of color. It didn't even, we didn't even, our gender didn't even make it in, right? And that's us, people who do these jobs. Your sister, brother, mother, father, cousin, auntie, whatever might be a doctor or a lawyer or a professor or a custodian. Is that the person that you saw? Or is it this conceived notion that you have gotten ingrained into you? Because that's how we get it, right? Biases are given to us. We're not born with them. Where does that show up? And the purpose of the exercise is not say, oh, you're a bad person. You don't see other people. I don't, people will say, I don't see color. I'm like, that's a problem. Okay, we need to talk about how that's a problem. That's a talk for a different day, right? I don't see color, so that didn't matter. I don't even think about it like that. And it's like, well, you need to. You need to think about it and sit and reflect and say, okay, of those things, what came up for me? What came up for me? When it got to behavior analyst, you know who I saw? I saw a person that looked just like me. I know tons of behavior analysts that don't look anything like me, but it wasn't actually me. I didn't see my own face. but I saw somebody who looked a lot like me. When I said principal, I thought of my elementary school principal because that's the first thing that came to my mind, who was this little petite white woman with a lot of curly hair. Um, which maybe is part of why I thought about her, right? Because I have a lot of curly hair that is not out today. And so this is how this shows up. It shows up in ways that we don't realize. That's why we close our eyes. That's why we're not looking at something else, right? We're sitting in the presence of a doctor right now. Is that the person we saw when we said doctor? Or is it what you see in your child's little book? Um, I'm going to hop on a very small soapbox, going a little tangent here. So I was like thinking about this talk today, and Madi and I were actually just on a panel, was it last week, where we were talking about some of these things. And so it's always kind of fresh in my mind. And every night at bedtime, I read my kids' stories. It's our bedtime routine, and I was reading this book that is funny title, Even Firefighters Go to the Potty. And so my 3-year-old is potty training, but this book is from my oldest who's 11 now, but and my family is obsessed with firefighters. There are 3 generations of firefighters. If you're in that group, you understand that that's just a thing that generationally gets passed down. And I'm reading the book, and each page of the book talks about different people in different professions. And so the first page is like, it's time to go to the fire, but where's the firefighter? Oh, he's in the potty, right? And it's a white man. And you turn the page. Oh, they go to the restaurant, but where's the waiter? Oh, he's in the potty. Guess what? You think that was a white man? I want a white man. No, it was a person of color. The waiter, the waiter is a person of color and in the potty. The firefighter is a white man. Okay, you turn the page. They go to the doctor's office. They're waiting for the doctor. Where's the doctor? Guess what they say? He's in the potty, right? Guess what color the doctor is? Guess what gender the doctor is? It's a white man. Okay, you turn the page, right? And so on. And so you get the point. There's an astronaut. Guess what the astronaut is? The astronaut's a white man. Who's a garbage man? A person of color, right? And so like this is how these things get ingrained in kids, right? Because I'm reading the story and I'm like horrified, right? Because I'm like, this is like everything that I want to teach my kids not to believe. And here they love this book. We've been reading it for 7 years because it's been passed down from each child when we start potty training. And so these things show up in ways that like, we don't always realize, but there's intention there, right? And so I changed the words in the book and I'm like, where's the doctor? She's in the potty. I didn't color in the book, right? But like I'm changing the words as I'm reading it because I'm like, you 3 boys need to learn that luckily they're my mom. I'm their mom. They're not my mom. I'm their mom, right? And so I'm actively having these conversations with them. And they see me in a role as a business owner and see, some of those things right in front of them. But this is what is being delivered to my white boys in America. And so anyway, I think it's important to know that like this was not, I did not intend for that to happen, right? I've been actually reading that book for a number of years, and this is probably the longest maybe I paid attention to it where I was actively like, can I get rid of this book now? Because like I've seen this one too many times. Anyway, so being in touch with that is a critical part of being responsive. You have to acknowledge what you're bringing to the table in order to recognize how it comes out, how it shows up, and how you're going to do different next time. We're not perfect humans. One of the things I mentioned when we were doing this panel last week was, how do you practice? Are you practicing with yourself? Because when you practice internally, it is as good. We know this. When you practice with your own inner behavior, especially in like a see, do, or like a hear, do scenario, right? Because like Thinking is listener behavior, right? You're talking to yourself. There is some verbal behavior exchange happening in your brain. You can better prepare yourself for these scenarios. And so I was sharing that one of the things that I practice in my head is reframing pronouns. And so that I, in my head, practice pairing pronouns with somebody's name so that I don't mess them up. Because that's a value for me, and I don't want to do that. And I know, just like everybody else, right, that gets paired for us in very gendered ways. And see does not always equate to say, right? And so you have to practice what you want that frame to look like, right? If we talk about relational frames, we can talk about the autoclitic framing of it, right? Or just more simply, when you see this person, what is the pronoun that you want to ensure you're using? And so I practice in my head, this person, this pronoun, and then I practice what I'm going to do if I get it wrong. Because you might, because you're a human. And that's normal. And people understand that. And how you respond to that matters. And so practicing that in your head allows it to not be a reactive thing. It allows it to just be a smooth response that you then can just work through, remain flexible, not have your whole body and your shoulders go up to your earlobes, right? And continue moving through. And so engaging in practice like that is really, really helpful. You can practice with yourself. Inner behavior is real, right? Your thoughts are real, even if they're not right, right? And so that's something that I often encourage people to do. Do you want me to take the next one and then hand it over to you, Meg, for self-assessment? Does that make sense? Okay. So this is just a little bit about self-reflective practice. So self-reflective practice, and Madi already gave a lovely overview of some of this, but refers to the intention and systemic problem by which a behavior analyst critically examines their own behaviors, decisions, and professional practice, right? And it's done in order to improve the quality, effectiveness, and ethical alignment of their work. And so a couple of our colleagues are actually working on a paper now that's really going to help outline and pinpoint like what are the specific things that you should do in self-reflective practice and what are some of the behaviors that you would desire to change and what that incremental change looks like based on those. And so there was a lot of intention with chapter 1 of Reframe being about self-assessment. That's where it all starts. That's where we start evaluating alignment with values, right? What are our ethics? Ethics and values are somewhat the same, but they're also a little bit different. How do those show up in our lives? How they show up in your life outside of whatever hat you're currently wearing. Right now, I'm wearing the hat of author, right? Co-author of this book with these wonderful ladies and presenter, right? But when I move away, I might be wearing my clinician hat because I'm going to go do a assessment with a learner, which is what I was doing right before I came in here. And then a few minutes later, I might be sitting in my office and having a meeting with someone because my business owner hat is on, right? And how you act in all of those situations is not the same, and you shouldn't, right? That would be very strange and very inappropriate. But how do your values align with the interactions that you're having in each one of those places? And how is that showing up? And when are you taking the time to sit back and say, huh, okay, I like how I did this. I didn't like how I did that. Here's why that maybe happened. And that's okay. We all have whys. Man, 2025 has been a doozy. I have not always shown up in the way that I wanted to because life has been lifing real hard. And I am very aware of that, right? And when you need to engage in that and repair, do it. Do it, it goes a long way. But how often are you sitting back and thinking, if you're sitting and thinking it's everybody's fault, you know whose fault it probably is? It's probably your own, right? Because that's how that works. It's never everybody else's fault. And so how do we sit and take that and take not just a beat, a few beats and lean into that and say, wow, okay, you know? And sometimes it's not that day. And that's okay. I've had days where I'm like, I need to reflect on how I've shown up in this insert thing here, relationship, friendship, job interaction, but it's not today because I don't have the capacity to reflect on my own behavior in that way. And I might be hypercritical of myself, which also isn't what I want to do either. I want it to be grounded and centered and meaningful, and have a reinforcing value to it, not where it goes into, you're a terrible person. Why did you do that? You never should have done that. You should never do that again. Right. And so our goal is to have you sit with yourself and engage in those exercises for you in ways that are comfortable. Um, and know that moment to moment, the comfortability around that isn't going to be the same. Okay,
Beautifully said.
you're up,
Um,
friend.
I will also say I said the exact same thing to my son this morning, which was if your only complaints are about other people, you might need to look at what is also happening with you. That went over really well, in case y'all were wondering. No, it was good. He's good. Um, okay, y'all, the self-assessments, really, as Jen was describing, these are the crux of a lot of reframe. We like to think about reframing our practices, right? Reframing what it is that we do, reframing how we look at ABA. The truth is, it's reframing what you're doing. Reframing, when you reframe your practices, that requires radical assessment of your own behavior. And we have been conditioned as behavior analysts to essentially turn that off. When we were in tune with our feelings was well before we started this coursework, right? Throughout that coursework, we were conditioned to no longer pay attention to that because it's going to give us no longer neutral information, right? We're no longer then going to provide what we observe. We're going to add our emotions to it. This is a time, however, that we actually do need to assess what's happening on the inside. That can actually be very difficult for us who've been in the field for a long time, or for those of us where it's just simply uncomfortable. So I'm going to share how we've used this within our agencies. I'm going to share the data first. So Jen, I'm going to request to share access real quick. And with this, we're going to, let me see, let me pull that up. Yep, perfect. Um, Look at what our staff had to say whenever we said, hey, we want you to complete these really radical and difficult assessments. Come on. Oh, has it opened? Technological difficulties. There we go. This was not the one I wanted, but that's okay. Okay. Can y'all see this okay? Perfect. So this was the follow-up survey that we asked our behavior technicians after they completed these self-assessments. It was voluntary for them to do both the self-assessment as well as for the responses. So of the 15 staff members that we had at the time, we had 12 who responded. Our staff now still complete the self-assessments voluntarily, or they skip questions as they need, but I don't have them do a follow-up survey anymore, mostly because every single one of them has said this was actually really beneficial. Even the ones who may have responded differently whenever we look at the responses here in a second. So since completing this personal behavior intervention plan, which is one of the steps within Reframe, have you been able to identify when you are feeling stress or overwhelm, sadness, anger, or other emotions? And then it's just a three-part question or three-part response. Yes, no, or sometimes. Are you able to complete self-checks to help realign your values, just like what we were talking about earlier, with the care that you're providing? In other words, are your ethics aligning to this context? Have you found this behavior intervention plan helpful? On a scale from 0 to 5, how comfortable were you with answering the self-assessment questions? So this was essentially like, how much did you actually want to share what we were asking you to share? Also, keep in mind too that we didn't ask, and we very much said, please do not give me the answers to your self-assessments. Did any of your responses reveal something about yourself or your history that you think will improve how you provide services to your learners? Do you think your BIP will help you stay regulated with helping a learner regulate? In other words, can you practice co-regulation skills now? Do you think that your ability to self-reflect affects the behaviors of others? How confident are you that you will be able to continue practice behavior change in your own life now that you've assessed your own behaviors and created a behavior intervention plan? Would you recommend this to others? And do you feel as though your professional performance has also improved after completing these? So, genuinely speaking, or generally speaking, and genuinely, um, we found the responses to be very positive. I can also attest that this has now been over 18 months that the survey's been completed. Not only do we still have all of these staff members, every single one of them has demonstrated these skills in the natural context. We had a medical emergency that came up in our center on Sunday this week. They're all running together. And every single person knew exactly what to do, and they were all practicing calm, cool, and collected, regulated behaviors. One person signaled, you call 911. I need you to stay with her. I'm getting a pillow. Amazing work and coordination. They kept the entire floor calm and regulated. There wasn't a single learner who then got escalated afterwards. And we had several who were higher magnitude needs learners. And instead, they stayed regulated because their behavior technician was also regulated. They were demonstrating co-regulation skills, right? So these behavior intervention plans have also demonstrated effectiveness in addition to what they have verbally reported through the survey. So yeah, they're all able to identify, man, I'm about to burn out. I'm going to ask for help because that's part of my behavior plan. And they're all doing it. And it's amazing. Now, some of them said, sometimes I'm able to complete these self-checks. And that's probably true because we still provide supervision. And as supervisors and good BCBAs, we check in on them. Hey, are you still doing okay? Do you need to go to the bathroom? That's my favorite thing. To walk around and say, do you need a second to go to the bathroom? Because then you're not like signaling to the learner, hey, this is getting to be too much, right? And just the change of that environment alone can usually reinforce at that behavior that happens before our larger magnitude behaviors. That also is the same for our behavior technicians, right? We want to intervene before we see them shut down or engage in rigid responses, right? Now, y'all, this is incredible. At the time, 83% said, yeah, I find this very helpful. And then one person said, sometimes. I guarantee you that one person now is more fluent in their behavior intervention plan now. And again, just based on what I saw. And this is kind of what I was seeing, or what I anticipated seeing with this question here, which was when you were first presented these, how comfortable were you? I really expected to see it across the board, which we did. This also goes to show that not a single person was really saying, you know what, I am so ready to do a deep dive into this. There was some apprehension, right? It wasn't the norm to feel really confident doing this. That's a reflection of really what it should be like for us as behavior analysts. We know that it's not normal for us to engage in these types of radical inner behavior practices. Rick Kubina would say something totally different because it's normal for him and it's normal for us. But for many of our colleagues, it feels uncomfortable. And this, I think, demonstrates and reflects that as well. Every single person said that this revealed something about themselves that would possibly impact their ability to provide services. So again, like what Jen was talking about earlier, we have this bias check within these self-assessments. We talk about what was it like when you were raised? When your parents were upset with what you did, how did they respond? Because that's in your backpack right now that you're carrying, and you're bringing that into a home. Whether or not you're going from one extreme to the other, just so you know you're carrying it, right? And this is something that we work with our behavior technicians often because we work really 85% of our business is in home. We use our clinic as this generalization facility, essentially, to teach skills outside of the home. But what we find is that a lot of times behavior technicians struggle working with caregivers because it might remind them of how they were raised or the opposite. And then sometimes what you'll see is this drastic contrast between RBT and caregiver. And it essentially becomes child and RBT against caregiver. And we really do a lot to try to mitigate that so that it's not like, this is what you should be doing, mom. But instead of recognizing that this mom's in an active trauma response, we're going to provide the buffers per Dr. Kolu's work as best as we can right now and recognize that this caregiver is not in the capacity of learning. They are not an HRE, RRE, and that's okay. Just as we accept that with our learners, we're going to accept that with the caregivers. And that takes responsiveness. That takes self-reflection to be able to recognize that, oh my gosh, I'm passing judgment on this parent and I have zero right to as somebody who doesn't have children. Or I have zero right to because I'm carrying this from my backpack and I need to separate what's happening right now and work with this with somebody else where this is in their scope of practice, right? So again, we see this co-regulation. Over 90% of the respondents said, this is going to help me. And like what I mentioned earlier, 100% are they able to do this naturally. That's incredible. And again, over 90% said that, do you think that your ability to self-reflect affects the behaviors of others? And they're like, oh my God, yeah, actually. Now that you mention it, now that I've done it, it all makes sense. And so really what we're trying to show here is that what we're introducing again is not out of this world. It's not rocket science. It's just behavior analytic principles. And we're applying them to ourselves. Because as Maudie mentioned earlier, we're the number one stimulus that can change, right? The number one variable within the environment that's going to impact the responses that we're looking for our students. Awesome. Thanks for letting me share these results with y'all. We once got feedback that we didn't share enough data. And so I was like, I don't think that you watched the whole presentation, and that's fine, sir. I'm assuming it was a sir. There I go with my biased assumptions. There you go, person. Just assuming. Here's our data. Here is our data that show we have registered behavior technicians who have found these self-assessments very beneficial. And not only have they self-reported that these are beneficial, we as BCBAs and supervisors have seen them demonstrate these skills of self-reflective, culturally responsive practices in their everyday work ethic and practices. And that's my soapbox on why I believe these self-assessments are so important. You actually do have full access to the self-assessments within this coursework. They'll be emailed out to anybody who does sign up and register. I highly encourage you to complete them. We've got it in a nice little concise package. It's the same way that we deliver it to our trainees, so that when you see it, you say, this is the reason why we're doing it. Here's a self-assessment. And here is another exercise that I can use for myself for a behavior intervention plan and helping develop that. Thanks for letting me share that. So I'll also just kind of go on this little soapbox here as well, if I might. This really goes into what we were just talking about. So most of us, when we're training for somebody throughout that 40-hour training process of becoming a registered behavior technician, we have a tendency to blame the student or the learner. And we forget that the student, the learner, the rat is always right. So this is why our self-reflective practices are really important. When we're looking at our supervisory relationship, Jen talked about this earlier, there's already a power dynamic at play. You have to be aware of that as a supervisor, which means that no, you don't take them out to the bar later, but you do recognize you don't know where they're coming from right now. You are in a place of privilege. And your supervisee, your registered behavior technician, the person you're teaching is not in that same place. You may have those expectations for them because your supervisor did. That's in your backpack. You need to set it down because you're not demonstrating excellent leadership when you put people through the same tests and challenges that you were faced with instead of making it better, instead of improving the learning environment. If you're using the same outdated things that helped you become a great behavior analyst, that is an outdated practice. And I say that with love and care, but you aren't accounting for your own personal bias when you do that. You are literally projecting, by definition, onto your supervisees when you do that. So this is why we say it's important for us to do these types of self-assessments. These also are going to what helps make you, by again definition, a good leader. A leader that people will come to and say, I need help and I'm not afraid to ask for it. It's the same learning environment we expect for our clients slash learners, right? It's the same thing we would have wanted for ourselves that we weren't given. Don't make it hard for people just because you had a hard time. And that's my little soapbox on that. And for practicing good self-care and self-reflection, I'm going to leave y'all with this visual because this is something that I do often with my staff as well as myself. But I have to run to the restroom. So I'm going to turn my computer or my camera off. And Jen, do you want to lead people through this self-reflection exercise? I also do this. This is posted everywhere in our agency. Just we like visuals.
Life's hard, visuals help. Um, it is it's a good one. Yeah, so I think step one is noticing somatic, right? Somatic are the things that physiologically are happening in your body. How does that kind of permeate for you? So, where do you notice in your body when you are in a situation where Maybe you are embarrassed or embarrassed because you didn't act in line with your values, or you are engaged in a something that happened and it triggered something because of what you're carrying in your backpack, right? Where does it show up for you in your body? And so recently, in a room full of people, I kind of put this out, and these are some of the things that they shared was in my throat, in my chest, right? My throat gets dry. I feel my heart start racing, or I feel a shortness of breath. Is it your shoulders? Your shoulders go up. Is it that you do something with your hands, right? Is it in your head? Is it somewhere in your body? You're feeling it. And that's the signal to you, hey, your body's not feeling okay right now. You're not your best, most grounded self. And so, what do you need to do? First, you need to recognize, right, that this is what is happening, right? Then you got to breathe. Take a beat, take a deep breath or a few. You're always better taking a few moments, right, than responding too soon. And so, in my practice, we work with a lot of individuals with moderate to significant unsafe or interfering behaviors. And I have a long history of doing that in my career. And one of the first things I teach people to do is pause and take a few deep breaths. You are better off doing that, right? Um, what we know is when we have a heightened response, our brain shifts, right, from our front brain to our back brain. When your back brain is engaged, your front logical side of your brain cannot be working, right? And so you need to get yourself from back here to up here, and doing that in a way where you're taking a beat, because then you can better assess what you're going to do. So that's step three, right? You're going to assess what is your inner behavior saying? What are your inner thoughts? What's coming to mind for you? And how can you address that, right? What's that either, I often call it my inner dictator. Your inner dictator is the one that's like shaming you, right? Making you feel bad. So is your inner dictator talking? Or is your inner, whatever the opposite of that, your inner angel saying, right? Like, oh, look at you, your inner cheerleader, if you will. I don't have an inner cheerleader. That would drive me absolutely crazy if someone is in my head going, rah, rah, yeah, yeah, And so mine is kind of a more like even keeled, like, you got this girl, like when I was like doing, when I was years ago, when I was running regularly and training to do longer distances, I use this app, right? And you could decide what kind of instructor you want. And mine was like boss bitch energy. Like, you've got this, keep going, keep moving. I didn't want the rah, rah, yeah. And so, like, whatever that is for you, how do you engage from the inner dictator to your inner coach, if you will, right? Whatever that coach looks like for you. And then how do you make a fully grounded decision? What do you want to do next? You don't have to know what you're going to do an hour from now. You quite frankly don't have to know what you're going to do 20 minutes from now. You just need to know what's the next best thing. And so I now have recognized my body's having an experience. I'm going to take a few deep breaths. I'm going to recognize that inner behavior. This is what's going on up there. I'm going to get myself out of back brain into front brain. How do I get back and then re-engage where we're shifting the behavior to align with our values, right? One of my favorite ACT books is The Thriving Adolescent, where they use the DNAV model, which really resonates with me because I think about it kind of like, your compass, right? What are these towards moves versus away moves? So when you re-engage, you want to re-engage in those towards moves versus those away moves, right? And sometimes this takes a little while. Like when I'm upset, this process could take me 3 days. No, I'm just kidding. Could take me like an hour, like I'm just not ready. That grounded reset hasn't fully happened yet, which sometimes I need to add in there, like I need a snack because I'm feeling a little hangry, or like, It's 2:30 here on the East Coast right now, and I haven't had lunch, right? And so periodically I'm camera off and I'm scooping a salad in my mouth, right? Because I know that that's what's going to help me, right? And so sometimes these steps take a little bit longer, but you get to that re-engage, you re-engage, follow those towards moves, right? Remind yourself during that grounding state, like, am I acting in line with my values right now? What is my value right here? If my value is being a culturally responsive human, did I just do that? Right. And that is a value for me. And so that is something that I think about. Is this, I often think about it in like, is this the kind of as a boss, which is a weird word, a leader, right, of an organization, I often think, is this the relationship that I want to have with this person that I'm communicating with? No, that's actually not it. Like, I don't desire that. I desire to be a joy bringer, you know? And so is that doing that, or am I over here? Or does right now, based off of what I have, the decision I have to make is that the full towards move right now? Sometimes that can be conflicting. And then we're going to learn, what have you done here? That you do the same again. You know what? I really showed up in the way that I wanted to. Cool. Points for your towards moves, right? I really didn't show up in the way that I wanted to. Okay, well, certainly not my area of expertise. May could better speak to this, but this is where you have that present moment awareness, right? Like, this is what's happening right now. These are my committed actions, and know that, like, it's okay. You're not going to get it every time. It is okay to say, I didn't get it this time, but I'm committed to doing it differently next time. Okay. Do you guys want me to take this one and then we'll
Yeah,
pass it off to
go for
Gigi?
it.
Okay.
You're on, I like, yeah, right into leadership again. Perfect.
Okay, well, yeah, right into leadership. How did my behavior affect others, positively or negatively? Am I modeling the values I expect from my team? My business coach taught me a long time ago, because I've been with her for years now. She's really fantastic. And she taught me that if you're not your best, your team's not their best, right? And that the value of taking the time that you need to be able to show up in the way that you desire other people to show up. That, especially as a leader who I believe practices in compassion, I not only try to practice compassionate care with my learners, that says, like, you're allowed to have life experience. You're human, a human first model of supervision and leadership. How are you doing that for yourself? If you don't want someone to throw their hot potato at you, are you modeling that you're not going to throw your hot potato at them? Hot potato are your thoughts that are like, blah, get this hot potato out of my mouth, right? Out of my hands, right? Blah. Is that what you're modeling for them? And if you're not, how do you get there? Go for a walk, phone a friend, get on your favorite group chat with your business owner friends and say, bah, this is happening right now. And they're like, girl, I've been there. Me too. Help me. Right. I actually did that earlier today with these two ladies right here. Yeah. And then what data do I have on the impact of my leadership? So am I recognizing my own behavior and my own interventions as how they impact my team, right? And so if my team is struggling with something and I see it and I decide, okay, I'm going to do this differently. And so we recently, an example is like, our HR platform is glitchy. And it really stresses people out because sometimes their planned time off goes in the right way, and like sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it's not the right. And like that is upsetting, right? And it's like there's no malintent there. Like no one's like intentionally doing that. Is it the person who's running it? Is it the platform? We don't really know, right? And so what I've started doing is just putting checks in. I just go in monthly and I check it for people. Is this right? And if it's not, I fix it. And I say, hey, just wanted to let you know, I found that there was an error. I went and I fixed it. And hopefully that eases people going forward, because they know that, like, I know this is an issue. There's not a lot of great HR platforms out there. To be honest, if anyone is a developer, like, help us with that in ABA. But is that intervention working? Is that easing their angst about those things? And where do I need to pivot? Because you do. I mean, I know that there are things that I'm not good at as a leader. So my counterpart that is moving into an operations position is good at those things. She's very good at things like budgets and projections and looking at all the numbers and the health of the business in a way that, like, I'm not terrible at that, but that's not my strength. I'm a real good clinician, I think, to toot my horn. I'm not real good at all of those other things, but she is real good about it. And she is really good at it. And she actually also likes it. And so, how are you taking the feedback that you may have been given and recognizing that, like, I am a person in this environment? We all are. And me as the implementer, right? If we look at radically assessing the behavior of the implementer in this situation, it's me, the leader. How is my leadership, how is my behavior associated with my leadership impacting the greater community? And then how do I adjust that?
I'm happy to take this one for us. This is one of my favorite things. We talked about it just a little bit ago when we were talking about caregivers and walking into the home and recognizing that maybe our caregivers that we're working with haven't contacted reinforcement in some time. Maybe they struggle to engage with their kid because there's a lot going on. And I love this article that Jen actually cited because funnily enough, I came from a principal's meeting this morning for my son. And it was actually a very positive meeting. I'm going to lead with that. I always like to start with good news. But I asked him, I said, how are y'all encouraging a happy, relaxed, and engaged learning environment for my son and the rest of his peers? And the principal was like, well, that's definitely one of our goals. And I said, great. Now, how? How are y'all promoting this? And he said, well, I'm going to have to actually probably observe in the classrooms to see. And I was like, I think maybe so. Maybe we need to take some time. And I didn't say this to him, this is in my head. Maybe we need to take some time to analyze what's going on there and recognizing that there are many times that we are in an adult-led expectation of you should be learning versus the reality, which is they are not learning. And then again, recognizing that it's not the learners or the students who are in the wrong. They're not supposed to rise to the occasion, even though I've legitimately heard a teacher say this. The teacher is the one in charge of the environment. And if she would like to say that it's otherwise, then I don't think she's going to admit that, right? She's in charge, or he, they. God, here we go with those bias again. Thanks for that exercise, Jen. Again, I'm applying what's happening in my kids' school. So the teacher is in charge of this environment. I have had the privilege of working with students right now at the University of West Georgia, and it's fantastic. Most of them are general education teachers. One of them is an art teacher, another one's a math teacher. And the way that we are really focusing their supervision is how are we promoting this type of environment in your classroom? And do you know what? Every single one of them who has started to apply these types of principles within their classroom has said, oh my God, it's so much easier now. And I was like, right. It's because antecedent interventions really work. When we're talking about establishing operations, what are you establishing? Are you immediately throwing the shoe at them and saying, do what I say or else? How effective is that? So when we look at what it looks like to be engaged, this is something, again, one of my favorite articles, because it really does show that when we include the student, the learner in what they're doing and how we're building this curriculum around them, it's incredible the results that end up happening. When a student wants to assent to the demand because embedded within that stimuli is something that actually is meaningful to them, they're going to learn. If the teacher takes just a moment to provide some non-contingent attention prior to placing the demand, it's a game changer. And I say this to my two friends who know this because that's why we wrote this book. We were tired of walking into classrooms and being like, why is my student over there in the corner by himself? He didn't want to do the classwork. What did you do? That's legitimately the question I want to ask the teacher is like, what's wrong with you? What do you mean he didn't want to do the work? And then meanwhile, I'll walk over there with the same flippin' worksheet, but because I'm a conditioned stimulus of somebody who gives a shit, suddenly the student starts doing it. Was it that he didn't want to? Or was it that you didn't know how to present the demand and you have yet to condition yourself as a preferred reinforcer for this child? That's on you, teacher, not on my student. No, get here. No, that's what I want to say often. And I will say that we've also been able to pull kids from school and do intensive behavior analytic and precision teaching with them. And we get them back into school. And do you know what happens? Magic. And all of those teachers are like, oh, I didn't know she could do that. I did. Do you know how I did? Because I provided an enriching environment for the student to actually want to learn. She felt safe for a whole year. In fact, she was terrified of going back to school because she was worried that she was going to be unsafe. She's not, and she's thriving, but that's also because we're there. And she's doing fantastic. She's leading dance routines. She is reading in front of her peers. She has a friend. And these are all things that we were able to get her to because we reinforced and enriched her environment so that we made it appropriate for her to learn. We embedded psychological flexibility activities and choice point throughout her day. Her values were constantly a discussion. And this is going to sound odd. The function of her behavior is not tangible, but she would ask for things and we would say no. And people were like, why did you say no to that? Because she needed to feel safe. And what would end up happening is if we said yes to one thing, it would become a slippery slope into everything else. Her environment was enriched enough. But what we also knew is that if she was asking something from somebody, she wasn't getting the quality attention that she needed from that person. And that person wasn't conditioning themselves in a way that was actually behavior analytic. So we had to readdress that. And that took self-assessment and creating a behavior intervention plan for each adult who worked with this person. But what we found is that she's thriving at school. And I truly know, based on the data, can say this affirmatively, that it was because we created a happy, relaxed, and engaged environment for her. If she wasn't, we were able to help co-regulate through psychological flexibility and practice and our own behavior intervention plans to get her back on track so that episodes didn't escalate to a point of danger. And I'm proud of that student. And I'm proud to be able to show and demonstrate how to do this in Reframe with how to be engaging and create an engaging environment. Ooh, this is a good one. Madi, this talks a lot about our good friend, Dr. Tarbox.
Yes. And I think we mentioned this too at our last in-person together presentation that since this original search for compassionate care, we have definitely seen a little bit of an explosion in journal articles that have this catchphrase, compassionate care. And while that's exciting, I think it's really important too that we do our due diligence as we look and read these articles to really kind of flesh out what values of compassionate care are being, discussed in these articles, because compassionate care, and I think we talk about this in Reframe, is not necessarily the foundation; it's the compass. We talk about the compass in compassionate because it is what's going to guide difficult conversations, challenges, biases, differences that will help us to ensure that our practices, our interventions, our engagement, any sort of back and forth remains in that kind of ethos of culturally safe and responsive care. And so, when we first started this, how many years has it been now, ladies? I mean, it's been 3, almost 4 of us, diving into this work and this book that we've come on such a long way, and yet we still have so far to go because we know this as behavior analysts that the least response effort is usually the direction that someone goes, and if we are not careful, we can see compassionate care just kind of become another catchphrase that shields the true work that's happening that may not align with the values of compassionate care. And, Dr. Tarbox, Jonathan and his wife, they have fantastic, fantastic articles that really do resonate with those values. And so, several of their articles, we cited and referenced because the values that were so deeply embedded in that work that their own labor of love in these research articles, it was such important, and also verifying, right, as we're writing this book, that hey, we're not the only ones talking about this. Look, here's a lovely white guy who's saying the same thing, in case you just need that extra box to check off that what we're saying is legitimate, what we're saying is valid, what we're saying is research based. And then I kind of get on my soapbox sometimes about the reality that we even need compassion in order to justify using compassion is a little bit nauseating. If you really need proof through a white paper or through the ivory tower of academic research and journal publications to solidify for you that being a compassionate human being is a much more effective way to practice, I would encourage you to just stay in chapter 1 for quite a while. If you go to therapy, maybe take chapter 1 to your therapist and it becomes the homework, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And sometimes I really have genuine empathy and concern for people that struggle to find compassion as just a natural vein of humanity in the work that we're doing. And it makes me wonder, did privilege override compassion for you, right? That privilege is what got you to the places that you wanted to go versus compassion, right? Or was there just a complete lack of that for you on the receiving end, that it's a very foreign concept of I don't know what it's like to receive compassion, so why on earth am I going to give it? I don't know how to give it. But even those thoughts and that process is the act of self-reflection and recognizing, oh my gosh, I didn't get these things, or oh my gosh, privilege was what I received, as opposed to compassion from others, compassion in the community, and I've just grown up and gone through my life and career making it on privilege, not compassion. And that doesn't exist for everyone. So there is a level of empathy too that I have, an understanding, and acceptance that we have a lot of people that's part of the bias, right? Is why should I have to, lead with compassion? And then it also triggers kind of another pathway that can be very difficult for practitioners of, are you really in this because you need to feel that you need to feel that sense of burning desire to control someone else? And I see that unfortunately quite often, is that we have professionals coming into this field because it is sold and it is advertised and it, is just this kind of propaganda of like, look at what all you can control. Look at what you can do to others, as opposed to what you can do alongside with others. And so I unfortunately see many times people coming into this field because there is something very much missing, or some very serious wounds where we're using this career to establish some agency, autonomy, and control over others, because maybe it doesn't exist in other places in our lives. And so that can, while I have that empathy for that realization for people as they might come to it through self-reflection, it's also important to acknowledge how dangerous that is, because it can lead people who say they have a very specific set of values to actually engage in contradiction of those values, and even sometimes push the boundary of what's morally right and ethically right. As practitioners, it becomes that kind of slippery slope of, unfortunate things that we see on the news of, BCBAs doing, that unfortunately have have them losing their jobs, losing their licensure and certification. And so I just think it's really important that we recognize, yes, we're finally talking about compassionate care. Yes, there are researchers and practitioners such as the tar boxes who are really in it. It's not just that superficial, surface level catchphrase that they're using to gather readers. But then there is also still a lot of work to be done for people to unpack why it's difficult for them to seriously consider and recognize that compassionate care is a cornerstone of what we do. And I think it was Kirby and Spiker, and I can't remember the other author, and I'm so sorry. They talk about the eighth dimension now of applied behavior analysis, which is compassionate care. And I mean, really, it's been there all along. But again, the fact that we have to add it for people to be like, okay, I guess I'll think about it. I guess I'll consider it. Really speaks to how far we still need to go in our field to sit down together and recognize that a lot of what we're doing is not compassionate. And a lot of what we're doing is out of our own wounds and our own needs that are bleeding into the work that we're doing. Oh, and that takes us to the next slide. As we walk through this self-reflection process, which is a lifelong process, I know I'm saying this in every possible different way. Again, this is not a 6-hour training that you can do in one and done, or reading a chapter and like, got it. This is a lifelong process. This is something that, should become as routine as brushing your teeth. So I hope you brush your teeth at least twice a day. But along with recognizing our wounds and biases and things in our backpack that are essentially barriers to us understanding the need for compassion in our practices, we also have to engage in that self-reflection of like, why did I want to do this? Why did I pick this career? And are we engaging in true empathy, right? Are we doing this out of sympathy or pity? Are we doing this out of empathy? And that is a term by Dr. Kenneth Hardy that talks about how, empathy and language around empathy is very generative. And both sympathy and empathy are very slippery slopes to a saviorism complex. And if we're honest enough with ourselves, and sometimes I tell people, like, I need you to actually look in the mirror and look at yourself, because the easiest person to lie to is yourself, because you don't have to look at yourself in the eyes when you're doing it. So go ahead and just stand in front of a mirror and ask yourself some of these really hard questions. Face yourself, and ask yourself, why did I get into this? Why am I doing this? Because many times there is this veil that exists for people in positions of privilege, that exists for people in positions very close to social proximity or proximity of social power, right? That are unable to see that they have sort of this phrase that I kind of came up with and coined several years ago, of like therapeutic colonization. Right? It's that missionary mindset. This is my missionary field, and this is my work. But I get this image, and it's from an old kind of comic meme, like way back, where it's this picture of a bread truck driving through fields, and you see all of these children who, appear to be impoverished, right? They're running barefoot, their clothes are tattered, they don't look clean. And this bread truck is driving through this field, and the back of it is open. But instead of the workers or volunteers tossing out bread, they're tossing out Bibles. And for me, that image comes up where, we've got families and communities and learners that are chasing after our white, bread truck of, the things that they really need, right? Advertised on the outside of it. But we have the back door open and we're tossing out Cooper books, right? Like, this is our kind of missionary mindset and the good that we're doing. And that's that saviorism complex that many times, if you are not actively working on self-reflection to find where the veil is over your eyes, you're not going to recognize that this is really why you got into this field. And that's not a healthy reason, because it is the first step and probably the foundation of ableism. Because in that mindset, we're thinking and maybe even convincing ourselves, poor you, if you just let me help you, I can make you more like me, or I can make you more like the standard, right? And what is the standard? Majority, white, neurotypical, right? And so this is a component within the self-reflection process where people have to be brutally honest with themselves and asking the question of, like, okay, outside of this career, outside of, all of this that I've moved towards, who am I? Right? Who am I beyond the initials behind my name? Who am I beyond the GPA that I got and the degrees that are hanging on the wall? Who am I as basic and simple and pure as, like, when I'm driving in the car and, what's my favorite song that comes on that I'm for sure going to sing horribly at the top of my lungs? And for a lot of people right now, it's that song Golden from K-pop Demon Hunters. Everybody turns that song on blast, right? People start bopping their heads. Like, so who are you in that frame? Who are you when the world is just crushing its weight on your shoulders and you're just sitting on the floor of your shower, letting the hot water hit you and just sobbing your eyes out, because you know what the weight of that world is for you? It's your lived experience. I know all three of us have that right now in our own capacity. Who are you in that moment? And who are you, as you have to get out of the shower and dry your face and just pretend everything is fine to go into a career and those things not come up, right? Those things not bleed and just ooze into the work that you're doing and the engagement that you have and the culture that you create. And so compassion really is about starting with empathy, right? And having a deeper acceptance of other people without always having to agree or understand, but going further and seeing where our actions aligned with theirs, right? Not forcing, not telling them what to do, but walking side by side with them. What we're able to do to help alleviate suffering without sacrificing agency and autonomy and unique culture and unique demographics. That's really what it's about.
Do you want me to take this one? Or you want to keep going?
I'm good either way. However,
Why
you
don't
can.
we, and then after we wrap up this, then we can end for the day and then we'll pick back up on the 23rd.
Yep, perfect. Jen,
Awesome.
I'll let you take it. Go for it.
Well, all right then. So as we think about, right, we have these research articles, we have folks talking about this, we have this like buzz term that's going around, right? Compassionate care, progressive ABA, today's ABA, right? Whatever, insert whatever one you've heard here, right? And one of the things that we really thought about was like, what does that really mean? What does that mean? Boots on the ground every day in implementation. And so we know what it means in our hearts. We know what it means in our minds, right? But what does it mean to do? What does it mean to step away from the knowledge and move into the implementation? And, in precision teaching and instructional design, when we're building programs, we look at programs, responses, right? And things called critical features and variable features. And critical features, I'm going to really, really make this short. It's far more complex than this, really, but critical features are the have-tos. If you're doing this, you have to do this, right? If this is this, it's got to be this, right? Critical features of a door, right? Got to open and close, right? It's got to act as a protective barrier, right? Okay, variable features, a knob. Some doors don't have knobs, some doors you push, right? That's a variable feature. Some have them, some don't, right? So to say you're this, you got to do this. And maybe you want to do this too. And some people might do this and some people might do that, right? And so when we looked at compassionate care, one of the things I did was I went to the research and was like, hey, we know a lot about this stuff, but like ain't nothing in here that says like you actually what it means is you're doing this and this and this and this and this. And so obviously that's how this book came to fruition, right? Was like we actually are people who like pretty solidly know that we're doing this day in, day out in practice. And how do we teach other people how to do that too? And so to do that, I think it's important that we look at what are the critical features of what we're doing. If you're saying you're practicing compassionate care, it means now this is my opinion. Somebody else may have some features that to me are critical that they think are variable or variable that they may think are critical. But I think as it pertains to reframe and certainly kind of daily practice, this was the starting place. Some of this was grouped from different trainings that we did where we crowdsourced, right? And was like, hey, you guys tell us, what does it mean to do these things? And so a critical feature of providing that compassionate care is that you're leading with empathy. A critical feature is you're engaging in assent-based care. You're building learner autonomy. The goal is that you're working yourself out of a job, right? You're not using escape extinction, you're not using attention extinction, and there's no force compliance. And so at the foundation, these are pivotal things that compassionate care is or is not, right? If you're doing escape extinction, probably not compassionate care, right? And does that mean that we don't sometimes use extinction or often use extinction? Of course we do. That's differential reinforcement. That is a part of it. That's not what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about making somebody stay in a situation that they don't want to, that we are not allowing them to leave from, right? That is not compassionate. That's not leading with compassionate. That's coercive and power and control and ick. And then the variable features are you might be using universal protocols. I use universal protocols. We use them for every single learner within our organization. It's like day one. They have a treatment plan. They have, we call them UniPros for short. They have UniPros. What are you doing? Right. And you may not call them universal protocols. That's what we do. We got that language from Dr. Hanley and colleagues over at FTF and the folks up at Upstate Caring Partners, and other folks, I'm sure. Sorry if I'm missing you here. Right? That's what we use. You may be using skill-based treatment. Skill-based treatment is compassionate care. Is compassionate care skill-based treatment? No. No. Skill-based treatment is a compassionate approach to treating severe problem behavior and dangerous behavior. Yes, it's an amazing protocol. It's awesome. Use it every day. But you can do compassionate care without doing skill-based treatment. The 7 steps for instructional motivation. Amazing, awesome tool. We teach every person that comes in with it. Thanks to Dr. Megan Miller, DeLeon. And awesome, great. Is that a compassionate approach? Yes. Is that all encompassing in compassionate care? No. Can you be practicing compassionate care and not use that? Yes, right? Not using hand over hand prompting, not physically leading, allowing time and space under all safe conditions, right? And so you may do some of those things. You may not do some of those things. You may use some of those things in certain circumstances and not in others, right? And so they're not defining features of compassionate care. And so part of our goal was to outline, hey, you know what? We actually pretty solidly can say that like this is important. And if you're going to do this, you got to make sure you're doing these things. And so as it pertains to engaging, right, this is all a part of that. How are you engaging with your learners? Are you leading with empathy? Do they have the ability to withdraw their assent at any time? Are you following their lead, right? Are you opening the door? Do you have an open door policy, proverbial, right? I'm not telling you that you should let them run out into the street. That would be dangerous, right? A proverbial open door where they can walk out when they want to, right? Or disengage, say, you know what? I don't want to do this. This isn't working for me. When they are upset, are you validating them instead of saying, let me know when you're ready? I'll know you're ready when your hands are folded and you're sitting in your chair and then you're like, woo, right? What does that look like? And so in order to engage in this bi-directional relationship with your learner, we believe that these are the things you should be doing. And we look to outline those within the model, and then we'll talk about those obviously as we get further into this implementation course as well.
Amazing. So that wraps up our part one. And we really appreciate y'all bearing with us through technical challenges as well as the challenges of our summers. This was honestly the first time that we've been able to get together to record since May. So I appreciate y'all. And please be on the lookout for the next part of our series in October, at the end of the month, October 23rd. And we'll record part two for y'all. Excellent. Oh, for course credit for CEU units, make sure that you email ace@acrossenvironments.com. At least, let's see, this is a 2-hour workshop, 6 takeaways that you have from this one. That's the new requirement. It's an arbitrary number, in my opinion, but they didn't ask my opinion. But they are asking yours. So please email 6 takeaways as well as with your BCBA number so that you can receive your certificate of completion. And as usual, please allow 2 weeks to have that processed. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, ladies.